Dan, it's great to have you back on Full Story.
Great to be back, Nour.
The coalition over recent weeks, as you and I have discussed, has been plagued with internal dysfunction and disunity over its identity and policy direction. Now, Barnaby Joyce, a man who was once the Deputy Prime Minister, is, many suspect, planning a defection to One Nation. Murmurs of this began last week. What set that off? And was this a surprise to you and others on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, so if we take a step back, so very late on Friday when journalists are packing up and thinking about what they're doing for the weekend, story broke in the Nine papers that Barnaby Joyce was in what was described as advanced talks to join One Nation, and in doing so defecting from the Nationals. And very quickly, my colleagues here in the Canberra Bureau made a whole bunch of calls and were able to firm up that that was a genuine possibility. Fast forward to the Saturday, Barnaby Joyce releases a statement to his members where he doesn't confirm that he's defecting to One Nation. He doesn't even really say he's necessarily explicitly quitting the Nationals, but he does say his relationship with the party has irreparably damaged for reasons of a personality clash with David Littleproud, for reasons of the party's position on net zero as it stands. So he confirmed that he would not be recontesting the seat of New England in New South Wales at the next federal election, but he essentially said all options are on the table. And when a politician does that, says all options are on the table, it triggers the speculation, and it certainly fueled the speculation that he was going to join One Nation. So to the question of whether it's a surprise, we know that Barnaby Joyce sits on the right of the National Party. He certainly has similar views on the issue of net zero, which seems to be the catalyst for all this. There was some reporting prior to the election that Barnaby Joyce had actually been courted by Pauline Hanson. There had been discussions about him potentially joining during the nadir of the last term for him as he battled various personal issues. That never eventuated, but I suppose that planted the seed, and when reports linking Barnaby Joyce to One Nation resurfaced over the weekend, it didn't take a kind of a gigantic leap of logic to think that it was a possibility. So as we're recording this morning, on Tuesday morning, no firm decision has been made, but I think all signs are certainly pointing to his relationship with the Nationals being over, and more likely than not resuming with Pauline Hanson and One Nation.
I do just want to talk about that for a minute. As of recording, Barnaby Joyce has not resigned or quit the Nationals. What has he publicly said about his intentions and his motivations as he's been, asked questions by journalists over recent days? What is he saying?
The context of all this is over a period of time. You mentioned that Barnaby Joyce had been the Deputy Prime Minister once. He'd actually been the Deputy Prime Minister twice. He's been around for a very long time and been in very senior positions. But what we've seen since the 2022 election, when David Littleproud took over the leadership of the Nationals, is that Barnaby Joyce has become increasingly ostracised within the Nationals party room. He's obviously a very significant figure. He was still in shadow cabinet in the previous term, but he clearly didn't get along with David Littleproud. And there were a couple of issues, certainly during the last election campaign. There was a kind of unofficial edict that was issued by Littleproud's office that effectively meant Barnaby couldn't campaign outside his seat of New England. And that was essentially the purpose of that was to concern among Nationals that if Barnaby went to other parts of the country, he might be very popular in his part of the world, but unpopular elsewhere. So that's the context to this. That's why this wasn't necessarily surprising. And since the news has broken, Barnaby Joyce has not hidden the fact that his relationship with David Littleproud is very bad. He's described it as a kind of an unhappy marriage.
You've got to think of it a bit like a marriage. If someone came up to you, or a girlfriend and boyfriend said, look, I've got an issue, we need generational change here, you'd go, that's not looking too good. And then at the same time they said, and by the way, if I go out in public, I don't want to be seen with you. You go, not looking good. Not looking good at all.
So that's a big part of it, the relationship with David Littleproud. The second is this issue of net zero, and Barnaby Joyce has really put a stake in the ground. He's always been sceptical of climate change and of climate action. He very begrudgingly signed the Nationals up to net zero with Scott Morrison in 2021, but he's never really believed in it. And what we've seen since the 2025 election, after which David Littleproud shunted him to the backbench, Barnaby Joyce's campaign to get the coalition to repeal net zero has really intensified. He's introduced a private members bill in Parliament. It really has become his single sort of reason for being at a political level.
If you want to drive Australia into the dirt, stay with this ridiculous idea that Mr. Bowen can change the climate.
If Littleproud doesn't do that.
And as it stands today, the Nationals currently support net zero. We might get to where they might land in coming months, but as it stands, the party supports net zero. Barnaby Joyce can't live with that, and as such, he says his position in the party room is untenable. So, to sum up, the two reasons: dislike of David Littleproud and dislike of net zero.
Certainly no love lost between Barnaby Joyce and David Littleproud. How will this affect the Nationals? Is it a blow for them? Do you get the sense that Littleproud wants Barnaby Joyce to stay?
Publicly, he's saying yes.
But it's up to him in terms of where he wants to go next. We've made it very clear he's welcome. We're going to have some policy discussions that I thought he would probably want to be part of in the near future.
So in the interviews that David Littleproud gave over the weekend and then yesterday, he was saying, look, we want Barnaby to stay. He noted that Barnaby hadn't actually tendered his resignation. There was still hope, what he was projecting that Barnaby could be convinced to return to the fold. But I think deep down, Barnaby Joyce has been a stalking horse of David Littleproud for years. There has been a group of sort of ardent supporters of Joyce, and that has always caused problems for David Littleproud. He's always had to look over his shoulder, and the reason we didn't see a challenge in the last term was simply because Joyce didn't have the numbers to do it. If the moment he had the numbers, he would have made a play for the leadership. What we've seen towards the back end of last term and since after the election is Barnaby Joyce has lost quite a few allies within the party. So his personal support base has diminished. Someone like Keith Pitt, for instance, who's now the ambassador to the Vatican, he was a really strong supporter of Barnaby Joyce. He leaves Parliament. That leaves Joyce with one less number that would support him. So publicly, David Littleproud is happy to see the back of Barnaby Joyce. Publicly, he's happy for he wants Joyce to stay, but I think deep down he's happy to see the back of him.
Dan, Barnaby Joyce is a big and boisterous character in Australian politics, and he's held his own seat of New England for many years. How popular is he in his own electorate and in other parts of the country?
In a word, in his own electorate, popular. I've got the results, the AEC data from the last election in front of me, and he's got a margin of 17%, which any MP across the country would love to have a margin like that. He increased his margin at the last election by almost 2 percentage points. So he is really popular. His brand of politics, his style, wears the Akubra hat and the RM boots. He's got a brand that resonates in that part of the country. But of course, the challenge that politicians face is once you become a national figure, regardless of how popular you are in your part of the world, you have to be able to connect with voters all around the country. And this is a challenge that the Liberal Party have faced for a very long time because Barnaby's popular in his part of the world. All of the Nationals are individually popular in their own electorates. The Nationals didn't lose any seats at the last election, but the policies and the rhetoric that makes the Nationals popular in their part of the world have had the effect of being a drag on the Liberal Party in seats in the inner cities, for instance. So if we think back to 2022, which was the election where Scott Morrison was Prime Minister, and obviously the Liberals suffered a very heavy defeat, lost all of those teal seats. And in the aftermath of that, a large proportion of the blame was, or the finger pointing was at Scott Morrison, that people hated Scott Morrison. They loathed his position on climate action, for instance. So all of the blame was put on him. You speak to any Liberal that lost a seat to a Teal independent, they say Barnaby Joyce was actually, who was Deputy Prime Minister at the time, he was arguably the bigger drag than Scott Morrison, that people in their part of the world, whether it was women, whether it was younger voters, they just didn't like Barnaby Joyce. And this is a challenge the Coalition have faced for a very long time, is the Nationals keep winning in their seats, but the reason they keep winning in their seats makes it harder for the Liberals to win in capital cities, and what we've seen is them hemorrhage votes in those places.
Okay, Dan, so a lot of the reporting suggests that Barnaby Joyce will attempt to run for the Senate at the next election with an eye on taking over the leadership of One Nation from Pauline Hanson. You wrote a couple of weeks ago about opinion polls indicating that support for One Nation is on the rise. And here you have a former deputy PM flirting with the far right, with the populist right. Is this an attempt by Barnaby Joyce to capitalise on that rise we're seeing in the polls?
Potentially. I think there's, Barnaby Joyce is a career politician. So I think in making a decision like this, it wouldn't just be, don't like the Nats, where is a kind of natural ideological home for me, I'm going to move to One Nation. I think there's probably a bit of strategy behind it, and thinking, where can I, if I'm not running for the Nats in New England, where is the most likely place for me to be able to continue my political career? Maybe a position in the upper house is the way that he can do that. What has also happened at a local level is in Barnaby Joyce's branch in Tamworth, which was in the seat of New England, there has been a series of people defecting from the Nationals to One Nation. So you think of your branch as kind of, they're your people. They are they're not only supporters, they're supporters that are willing to turn up to branch meetings. They vote in the pre-selections. And for Barnaby to have seen those people defect to One Nation, I think gives a pretty clear signal of where the mood of his supporters is. So I think he's sort of acknowledging that, but also I think there's a fair bit of, where can I go to prolong my political career?
So along with the breakdown of his relationship with David Littleproud, Barnaby Joyce pointed to net zero as a sticking point, a reason for his decision to jump ship. You've reported that coalition backbenchers will be meeting next week to discuss this. What is the purpose of that meeting?
So as you said, we've reported late yesterday that coalition backbenchers have been invited to remain in Canberra after the sitting week wraps up next Thursday, in a quite sort of unusual move for a 3-hour kind of powwow about energy policy, and specifically net zero. And the purpose of the meeting is to give every MP, and you need to be physically attending to be able to participate, is to give them an opportunity to, I guess, have their say, or perhaps more accurately vent about the party's position on net zero. And this is the kind of big unresolved question 5 months after the election for both coalition partners, both the Liberals and Nationals, is what they're going to do about net zero. And I guess that's code for what do they want to do on climate policy. And like I said, 5 months after the election, there are still sort of parallel reviews underway, one that's being led by the Shadow Energy Minister, Dan Tehan, another that's being led by the Nationals, looking at this question of net zero. Whilst those reviews have been ongoing, there's obviously been uncertainty about where they will land, what the party's position will be. That in itself has created this vacuum of people debating, what should we do? Should we recommit to it? Should we dump it? And it's also led to a degree of frustration with just how much of a distraction it has become. I feel like I've been on this pod 3 or 4 times in the past month talking about net zero, because it is just, it's a kind of all-consuming question that has become a bit of a proxy for which direction the party, whether it's the Liberals or the Nationals or the coalition collectively, should go down. So until this question is resolved, we're going to see that vacuum continue to exist, and we're going to see that frustration probably intensify as MPs grow more agitated with the fact they don't have a clear answer.
Does Barnaby Joyce leaving the Nationals, leaving essentially the coalition, hurt or help Susan Lee as she tries to corral a fragmented opposition? And what does that do to, I guess, the balance of power inside the coalition?
I think on the face of it, it helps her. So if we look at the specific question of net zero, Barnaby Joyce is never signing up to net zero. He's got a bill in Parliament to repeal it. He's one of the strongest advocates in Parliament for getting rid of that target. So long as Barnaby Joyce was in the tent, he's not in shadow cabinet, but he's still in the joint party room. Susan Lee, as she gets up and addresses joint party room meetings on a Tuesday morning of every sitting week, if she was to talk about net zero and climate policy, Barnaby Joyce is sitting at the back of the room, and you have to be able to get all of these people together to be able to support it. So if you ran the risk of Joyce crossing the floor, you ran the risk of others such as Matt Canavan crossing the floor. So it makes it more challenging with Barnaby Joyce in the tent. So is it going to be easy, even without him, to be able to land a position? No. And because we know that I spoke about the review that the Nationals are doing into net zero, everybody that I've spoken to within the Nationals over the past 24 hours think that there is going to be a pretty clear and definitive conclusion to that review, and that will recommend dumping the target. How Susan Lee then gets shadow cabinet to agree to a position on net zero if the Nationals within shadow cabinet don't agree to it, I don't know. Now, we know that Susan Lee and there are senior Liberals that are kind of discussing this really, really broad church approach to net zero.
Really broad.
really broad, that would attempt to accommodate just about everybody. I think it's pretty clear that there will be people crossing the floor regardless, but it is going to be really challenging for her to get it through it. If the Nationals, as we all expect, agree to dump the target, I can't see how the Liberals adopt it, even if that's what the Liberals want to do and attempt to do.
Will others follow Barnaby Joyce and quit over climate policy?
There's certainly threats of it. One of Joyce's closest allies, Lou O'Brien, signalled that he might have to do that if the Nationals recommitted to net zero. He shares a similar view to Barnaby Joyce that target needs to be scrapped. So he's one person. In speaking, though, to Liberals and Nationals who might be sympathetic with Barnaby Joyce's view about net zero over the past 24 hours, their strong sense was, no, we're staying inside the tent, because we think from within the tent we can have the greatest say in influencing the policy positions of a party of government. Because one of the things that Barnaby Joyce is going to have to reckon with once he's outside the major party, whether it's One Nation or sitting on the crossbench, there is a burst of activity initially. We see it with every single defection, whether it was Fatima Payman or others. And then as time goes on, they become less and less relevant to the mainstream media. And how Barnaby Joyce reckons with that, who is someone who has thrived and really survived on attention, how he goes being irrelevant is going to be one of the fascinating subplots for the rest of this term.
Dan, thanks so much for explaining all of that to us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.